Mike Vrabel got his first head coaching job at the NFL. It was 2018 with the Titans. He inherited a team that had a third-year budding star in Derrick Henry. DeMarco Murray was out, and Henry was now going to be the bell cow after being held back essentially his first 2 seasons playing the 1B role behind Murray. Vrabel had what he needed in Henry. He had everything he needed. In fact, Henry went on that season in the fantasy playoffs to average about 31 fantasy points a game during the fantasy playoffs weeks, 14 to 16. He blew up. He had during those fantasy playoffs, he had 71 carries. It doesn't get more bell cowish than that. Oh, and he had 7 rushing scores. That's why he dominated so much. But before that happened, he was held back, almost inexplicably. And in fact, Henry didn't run very well that year until the fantasy playoffs. I mean, he was getting by most weeks on 3 yards per carry or less for the first 6-7 weeks, and then gradually started getting going after that. But he wasn't getting the kind of volume that you would expect Derrick Henry to get in year 3. And the reason was they had a guy named Dion Lewis, who was a receiving game specialist, had 59 catches that year. But the strange thing is, Dion Lewis also had 155 carries that year. He averaged almost 10 carries a game playing alongside Derrick Henry, which makes even less sense when you see that he averaged only 3.3 yards per carry. He was not effective on the ground, just simply put. He entered that year as coming from the Patriots, being someone who really did have kind of a fantasy appeal, weekly fantasy appeal, and he continued to in Tennessee, but it robbed Derrick Henry of what would have been his breakout season. And instead, that breakout season happened in 2019 when he really became the Derrick Henry that we all know. But Vrabel held Henry back, and he allowed a guy who was a lesser running back to get over 200 touches that season. Fast forward now to this year. It's different, but there's shades of similarity, and that's why I'm bringing it up. Rhamondre Stevenson, TreVeyon Henderson, Vrabel's first year in New England. He inherits a guy in Stevenson who has been pretty successful in ramping up and becoming the starter on a team that went through a carousel of running backs, from Damian Harris to Sonny Michel and so on and so forth for years in the end of the Bill Belichick era. Stevenson was this holdover, and he's good. He fumbles a lot, but he's good. And then they spent a second-round draft pick on TreVeyon Henderson with the understanding, or at least there was a general understanding with a lot of fantasy managers and prognosticators and others, I certainly believed it, that Henderson would eventually take over during his rookie season. And then the incident happened. I talked about it on an earlier podcast. Week 3, Stevenson fumbles twice. The interesting thing to me about that was that he fumbled the first time and then he came back in, as if fumbling 6 times in, 5 times in 19 games, that should be enough. And yet he came back in, then he fumbled again. And he had, at that point, that was 6 fumbles in 19 games. Well, he fumbled, again last night. And he comes back in and he rushes for 2 goal line scores. And the first thing I think of is, wow, all these fantasy managers who have Henderson who are going, this isn't fair. This just isn't. What is Vrabel doing? I mean, I think that's a kind of would not be a surprising kind of mindset that most fantasy managers would have if you have Henderson. What is Vrabel doing? It's so obvious that Stevenson is throwing away the game with all these fumbles. 7 in 21 games is an insane number of lost fumbles. And yet here he is coming in and actually playing the hero down the stretch, driving down for that game-winning field goal. Stevenson got the ball. I mean, how crazy is that? That a guy who's averaged essentially a fumble every 3 games, a lost fumble every 3 games for the previous, 1.25 seasons, essentially, is the guy who they're putting their faith in what would be one of the more remarkable road upsets the Patriots have had, maybe the biggest in the post-Belichick era. And it worked. And now they're 3-2. And now suddenly they have this backfield with Rhamondre Stevenson, who seems untouchable now, right? I mean, he could fumble in the next game. He's not going to get benched in all likelihood. Vrabel, who knows? I'm not a fly on the wall in his conversations with his staff or what he's thinking on the sidelines. But it seems pretty clear that Stevenson is someone who he views as the number one running back, despite all the fumbles. But I want to make sure, because this is really important, and I think our emotions, sometimes get the best of us, and it happens to me sometimes where I feel like, man, why doesn't he see what I see? And really the answer is, why don't I see what they see? That Vrabel knows what he's doing. He's an established head coach. He knows what he's doing. He knows that Stevenson is the best chance they have, just as he knew that Dion Lewis getting 200 plus touches gave Tennessee the best chance to be successful that season. They went 9-7, and they were on an ascending, trajectory. And Henry eventually, like I said, became the bell cow, but he wasn't ready to be the 300 touch bell cow in 2018. That's what Vrabel believed. And who knows, but you got to sometimes trust that the head coach knows what he's talking about. Now, that's easy to say, and I understand the fact that head coaches sometimes get stuff wrong. So I'm not here to say, well, whatever the head coach says goes. But I will say this. If Henderson were as good as many of us think that he is, and certainly the Patriots management believed that he was when they drafted him in the second round, but if he looked as good in practice and in games as we think he does look or should look, then Vrabel wouldn't hold back. Right? I mean, what head coach would, after 7 fumbles in 21 games, say, you know what, I still don't want to go with my rookie second round pick. Henderson has not looked great. He's looked fine. The whole idea of Henderson is that we understand how good he can be because of what he did in college. But he's averaging only about 3.5 yards a carry, maybe 3.7 or something like that after last night. And he's got 1 score, and he's not the favored guy. And so at a certain point we have to say, well, it really maybe has less to do with Stevenson and his fumbles and more to do with the fact that Henderson is not deemed to be ready to take over. So I'll say what I've said before. If you're in Dynasty, you invest in Henderson in Dynasty because it makes sense, because as a second round pick with the type of success he had in college, the relatively low volume, but high enough to show that he can be a bell cow, that eventually he'll figure things out, and he's still only 22 years old, and there will be time for him in 2026, 2027 to eventually break through. But for now, I think we have to, starting with last night, I think last night was the moment that 2 weeks ago, I'll say, was the moment I thought, man, Stevenson going back in after his first fumble shows me that Henderson's not ready. But I thought, I think Henderson's going to be. I think this next week or two, he's really going to start taking off. And I think last night really showed me, you know what? It's probably not going to happen this year. It would take a heck of a lot. It would take Henderson to play in a transformative way compared to how he's been playing now to upend, to take over for Stevenson. Because for all of his flaws, and there are 7 flaws in 21 games of losing fumbles, Stevenson appears to be the more explosive running back and appears to be more dynamic. He appears to know the offense better. He is more trusted. And all of those things adding up cannot make us think that, well, it's not fair that Henderson isn't getting touches. I'm BJ Rudell, Fantasy Football Winners. Follow me on the blog. Email me anytime. We'll see you tomorrow.